go over that. But those are 3.5 stars that are worth reading. Make no mistake, because the historical aspect is just phenomenal in so many ways. And so basically what happens is the Hey y'all, it's Jess, and we're just going to talk about some advanced reader copies I got, or ARCs, in case you don't know what that means. And I got them through NetGalley, so I'm going to do a quick video. That means let's get started. What do you say? Okay, so the first one I read was The Fairy Door Diaries, and it was specifically Eliza and the Flower Fairies. It's by Megan McDonald, and thank you to NetGalley, Donald, and Dreamscape Media for the advanced copy. I listened to the audiobook. I have seen parts of the book itself, and it's very cute and it's fascinating. I know my friend Dottie loved it. Basically, the idea is that Eliza goes through a hidden door in her house, and she ends up in this fairy world where the flowers all have fairies. It sounds pretty okay. It's listed as middle grade, but honestly, I would put it closer to maybe Kidlit. Like, it's before you get deeper middle grade, like the 10-year-old middle grades, but it's definitely closer to like the 6-year-old, I would say, from my perspective of reading it. And what's interesting is there's this great build up and the story arc and stuff like that deals with the magical side of life, and I think it's perfect for kids. It's got illustrations attached. It's all really cool. So here's what I liked about it. I liked that Eliza was inquisitive and kind. She wanted to constantly help with the structure about how the bad guys were trying to hurt the other fairies, and it was creating this, very unhappy place. And it was destroying their little petal world, right? That's what they do. I really appreciated that, there's characters like Poppy and Haiku. They use these literary elements for it. And like the witch Wolfsbane made me grin, because, Stephanie Willing, who is the narrator, gave the best wails. I really liked the fact that a flower matching a fairy is very cool for those younger readers, because it's easy to follow the narrative a little bit, more. It's, that Poppy is Poppy. That there's not a hibiscus, but you knew that hibiscus would be hibiscus. You get the idea. I gave it 4 stars. And the only reason I didn't get 5 was because there was something that bothered me in the fact that it starts off as a new series. This is the first of a new series. But when you read it, you assume that this is like the 3rd or 4th book maybe, because the characters are much more friendly towards each other. There's a much more companionable relationship for, a human and a fairy just meeting, and the way the world is kind of put together. I think that maybe this should have been book 2. We'll put it that way, so we can establish book 1. But overall, I think it's great. I think it's fun. I definitely recommend it. It's a fun book. And then we have The Sea Gives Up the Dead by Molly Ogun, I think. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing that. It's got the little accented I over it, and I've always had really a lot of trouble with that. But basically, this one is a short story collection. It's of family stories sprinkled into the sail of fairy tale and left to take root and grow wild there. And it further says, these are stories about my family. These are stories about dragons and apocalypses and saints and cold bowls of dead puppies. The stories are about to be about family things, queerness, love, grief, forgiveness, unforgiveness, and longing. I don't think I agree with this write-up at all. I think that it was very misleading, because there's only like maybe 1 or 2 fairy tales in there. It definitely wasn't what I thought. Thanks to Red Hen Press, the author, and NetGalley for an advanced copy. I think this book needed a little bit more cohesion. I went from being hot and cold when I was reading it, which is why I gave it 3 stars. There were a few I liked. I liked My Husband and Me. I liked Small Monuments. The titular, The Sea Gives Up the Dead, and Foam on the Waves. Foam on the Waves was exactly what I was expecting. And that's basically a Little Mermaid retelling, but it's much darker. It's more of the Hans Christian versus the Disney. And there's a lot more depth to it. It's set in California, once upon a time type deal before the American colonists. And so I thought it was just fascinating, belonging and not belonging. And as well, I really liked the titular story because there was something, quite a few quirks in there that I didn't expect. And the reality is they came very well balanced. That story was above and beyond. But there were some that I did not like The Undertaker's Dog, which talks about the puppies. I actually stopped reading that one halfway through. I could not finish it. That had nothing to do to be in this book, right? This, it's basically talking about like not being maternal or paternal and just kind of looking at animals as beasts. But I also found that Esther and the voice to be a little bit too esoteric and wordy at times. I think that if you're going to read this, you need to check all the warnings, like Storygraph, bang on. I would definitely recommend it. You can see some of my reviews, by the way, of these books on Storygraph. I will link to it below, as always. But I'm under Library of Jest, just because that's what I picked when I first put it together, and it's easier for me to remember for this because this is my personal collection. Finally, we get to one that I really want to talk about, and that is the Rhino Keeper. Now, this one is interesting because how it is set up. I listened to the audiobook, which was Gillian Forsberg was the writer, and Caroline Hewlett was the narrator. About 11 and a half hours long, which is longer than most. Oh, I should mention the previous book, The Sea Gives Up the Dead, that one was written because it was so short it was easy for me to read. But this one, it's interesting because it's based on the true story of a Dutch sea captain who traveled with an Indian rhinoceros called Clara across 18th century Europe. And it evokes both the thrill of discovery in the archives and the wonder felt by a world in which no European had seen a living rhinoceros. And I will say, the author is bang on that. I only gave it 3.5 stars, and I'll go over that. But those are 3.5 stars that are worth reading. Make no mistake. Because the historical aspect is just phenomenal in so many ways. And so basically what happens is the current timeline in 2022, girl on an exchange program opens up a drawer and suddenly, all this information is dumped out about Clara because of where she lived. Then you kind of go backwards in time and you go with the keeper and you see how he became known as a Rhino Keeper, why he was a Rhino Keeper. And a lot of this is all conjecture because there's not a lot of information about the actual keeper, who was Ship Captain Duvalmont Vandermeer. I call him Du for a reason. He brought the only rhinoceros that most people in Europe had ever seen, because it's not exactly convenient to bring an animal that far. And he ended up having to get on a boat, go quite a ways around, and then come back to Europe that way because you couldn't cross the terrain with the rhinoceros. They didn't exactly have trains back then like that. So it was either ship or foot, and it just made more sense to do it by ship. But you kind of read along, and you could follow, the captain's journey and who he met, who he did this, who he did that. There was just this fascinating worldview, and it kind of, I want to say it's like historical fan fiction in some ways, which is not a problem for me, because that's what a lot of historical fiction is. Well developed on that front. The thing I did not care for was I didn't really care for the current storyline. It was the lead just was missing something. I didn't understand what was going on Andrea's mind, right? I couldn't understand what she was thinking, what she was doing, because there was no real clarity on why she was having issues with certain things, and I think that we really needed that. And there were some parts I didn't really necessarily agree with. I think that there were some threads that could have been pulled to tighten the sides of it. I've read several historical fiction books like that, and it's great, you have modern takes, but if you're only going to do that, then just leave it as a historical fiction of that time. It was very interesting to see how the moves made created a different timeline for this ship captain, and the decisions he made to keep certain people there and bring them back, and there was a clear look at how this was feasible, and I really appreciated that. They have this cart for her, they do all these things. It becomes a little bit of religious bigotry, and I thought that was a very interesting element because of the timeline and the way the world worked. But my biggest complaint again was the current timeline, and the conservation element of this book is fantastic. It's just amazing. And also the fact that proceeds from the sale of this book will also go towards rhino conservation is even more important, because how many big animals have we had, I don't know, in the past 100 years that have suddenly disappeared because, mystical, spiritual need for their body parts, their horns, whatever, or trophy hunting, which we see all the time. I found it a really fun and conversational way to talk about how to upkeep and the benefits of it. And there was actually discussion about, is this going to be good for Clara to be in Europe when, her body is used to the warm subclimate of India? And I think that it was a good reality saying that, yes, it's not great to bring her there, but she wasn't going to survive because her mother had been killed early on and she needed care, she needed upkeep. Otherwise, she was just going to become another victim of the animal parts trade. But also the idea of, look at what God has made, look at what, in this case with their book, look at what the universe creates, look at what nature has grown into being such an amazing element. And so I loved it. I highly recommend it. I think, again, if you like animal history, if you like looking at society in that way, if you like connecting it, I highly recommend it. Like I said, the 3.5 stars is because of me. That has nothing to do with the quality of the book. It's just what I really wanted that I didn't get out of it, and it kind of made it go down a little bit. It's set during the Enlightenment. It's all this great fact of, meeting some of the philosophers of the time. There's just this really great interwoven storyline there. And that would be all. That's all of the arcs I read. This is a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I think that the Rhino Keeper kept my thoughts. I'm still thinking about it. And it's been like 2 weeks since I read it, so that's not bad. I hope you're going to have a good day. Like, comment, and subscribe. Obviously, that little thingy down there is telling you at the moment. But also, what I'd really love for you to do is I would really love for you to tell me what animal you would like to see the conservation of. Or, if you don't want to do that, then put like a rhinoceros emoji in the comments so that way I can know you got to the end of this. Okay, guys. Cheers. Oh, I went German for a minute there. Bye.